My name is Barbara Ann Briggs, and I am a certified teacher of Transcendental Meditation and also the author of 2 books, Pilgrimage on the Path of Love, a novel of visionary fiction which has been hailed as the perfect amalgamation of spiritual awakening and self-discovery. I'm also the author of The Contribution of Maharshi's Vedic Science to Complete Fulfillment in Life. I'm a poet and a freelance journalist with numerous articles published in many different parts of the world. In this podcast, The Essence of Life, we will begin to understand the meaning of what is actually the essence of life and where can we find it. The essence of life is hidden in the silent source of life itself. The subject of today's podcast is the joy of surrender. On the spiritual path, one often hears the term surrender referred to as a requirement for living life in harmony with a higher power. It is almost as if one is required to let go of certain limitations or restrictions in one's thinking and behavior in order to make progress on the spiritual path. Surrender implies giving up of those impediments which bind one to a narrow, circumscribed vision of oneself as a particular body, race, caste, religion, culture, or profession. Of course, all these labels are relevant, but they do not express the highest truth of who one really is. Surrender implies expansion, openness, willingness to embrace a wider paradigm of who one is. By surrendering, one becomes whole. One loses one's individuality and gains universality. How does surrender actually happen? Surrender begins with acceptance and adaptability, but surrender is not an intellectual exercise. It is a spontaneous letting go, a willingness to trust, a heartfelt faith in the inherent order, in the cosmic design of life. It is only when one accepts what is that one can surrender to what is to come. To flow with the current of life, one must be like a fluid wave in the ocean. Waves move without any effort, carried by the surging magnitude of the ocean. Waves move fluidly, gracefully, effortlessly forward without straining. When one surrenders, one feels the mighty force of nature guiding one's movement forward. One feels as if one is being carried towards one's destination by a power greater than one's individual will. The joy of surrender is that it gives one the ability to live more fully in the now, to let go of some of the burden of memories of the past and expectations for the future. One can just be present and live simply, naturally, with greater freedom. Surrender means to yield. When one yields, one can withstand anything that happens without losing one's balance. One can be buffeted by storms but not overthrown by the winds of change, no matter how turbulent they may be. One knows deep within the core of one's being that everything will become right in the end, that one will find one's way home. In the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu it says, "The surest test if a man be sane is if he accepts life whole as it is, without needing by measure or touch to understand the measureless, untouchable source of its images, the measureless, untouchable source of its substances. When one surrenders, what does one surrender to? One is actually surrendering to one's own inner self, the Atman, the soul, the silent inner guide that inspires without imposing or forcing. The inner self is the link between individual intelligence and cosmic intelligence, between the soul, the individual soul, and God. When one surrenders, one is surrendering to the unmanifest source of infinite creativity, energy, and intelligence at the deepest level of one's own existence, one's own being. The process of surrendering is like the process of a wave melting into the rhythmic rise and fall of the ocean. One surrenders to the flow of life, the dance in which the dance and the dancer become one. The mystic poet Rumi says, "When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy." When one surrenders to the self, one is surrendering to the source of all that is good, true, and beautiful in the universe. This movement brings a sense of renewal, an abandon, a carefree sense of freedom, because it is a release, a loosening of the entanglements created by the mind, intellect, and ego. How does one arrive at such a state of surrender? The first and foremost method is simply by relaxing and letting go, just by being simple, by freeing the mind of worries, doubts, and fears, by smiling at life and accepting cheerfully whatever comes. By surrendering, one gains the ability to move forward patiently with grace and faith. One arrives at the state of surrender by letting go of the ego, the small self that attempts to control, to manipulate, to force events, people, and situations into the shape it desires. The ego tends to interfere with the natural flow of the current of one's life by over-asserting itself in an effort to gain mastery over the field of change. One becomes anxious when things don't go the way we want, but this anxiety actually creates obstacles on the path of achievement. As one evolves on the spiritual path, one gradually begins to feel that there is a reason underlying the apparently unpredictable occurrences and challenges one faces, and that by deepening one's awareness of oneself, one can progress toward a state of inner peace and harmony. One becomes a seeker on the path of self-knowledge. The path to surrender has opened. Like a flower, one's awareness begins to open to the inner sun. When the little ego surrenders to the higher self, the inner divine nature, then the process of evolution proceeds unimpeded. There are still inevitable hurdles to overcome. Evolution is still bumpy, but riding on the crest of the fast-flowing waves, one moves irresistibly forward towards the goal. The result of surrender is that one becomes more and more capable of living spontaneously from the heart, from the core of one's being, rather than remaining caught in the conflict between the mind and the heart, and ensnared in the configurations of do's and don'ts of the intellect. In the words of the great avatar Meher Baba, and I quote, "Spiritual advancement is a succession of one surrender after another until the goal of the final surrender of the separate ego life is achieved. The last surrender is the complete surrender, equivalent to the attainment of truth." End quote. The last surrender is the state of total liberation, the state of enlightenment, the attainment of oneness with the wholeness of life. It is a state of eternal freedom in divine consciousness. In this state, one realizes that I am everything, I am totality, I am the self of all. There is no more striving. The purpose of human existence has been attained. One lives in a state of perpetual fulfillment and radiates the light of bliss, peace, and purity into the universe. It doesn't matter if one lives a reclusive life apart from society or an active life of service in the world. The influence of one's consciousness, like the light of a laser beam, is all-pervading and uplifting to everyone, everywhere. In the words of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, founder of the Transcendental Meditation Technique, let yourself be possessed by yourself. Once you are possessed by yourself, the purpose of all wisdom has been achieved. This is the end of the journey of life. That is the state of fulfillment. You begin to live 200% of life, full activity and full silence. When we begin to live 200% of life, we don't feel that we are living anything else, just we are what we are. The state of enlightenment is so fulfilling for everyone because of this, that one wakes up in one's own total dignity. End quote. I invite you to subscribe to this podcast so that we can embark upon the quest of self-knowledge together. A new episode will be uploaded every 2 weeks. You are also invited to go to www.barbaraannbriggs.com to learn more about my work. You are also invited to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Barbara Ann Briggs. Until we meet again, very best wishes to you.